Okay, so I am actually going to record this, just because you may want to watch some of this later. Anybody still in the process of getting theirs uploaded? Okay, so go ahead and get those up there as soon as you can. Everybody else, let's scoot to the front of the room. Up here, I know it's embarrassing. Look at all of this prime real estate right here. Look at this. You want to be the first one here before the realtors move in and buy this up and upcharge you for it. So come on up, grab you some, so we can kind of scoot along the front of the row there a little bit too. Just so we can have a conversation. This is not the best room for this, but just get close enough to where we can all kind of chat. Okay. Wow, this is. I'm not always a fan of this room. Like it makes this a little less comfortable. So so we're gonna chat a little bit today. I'm gonna give you a few more minutes to get those files up there, and then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pull them down to my desktop. We're gonna play them up here, back to back, like just a long string of videos that we're going to watch. We're going to see a whole bunch of consistent issues in there, and we're going to talk about those. So we'll watch it a few times through. The first time through, though, is just show and tell day, right? It's time to hang it on the refrigerator, right? Like this is you've worked hard on this. This is your first playthrough, is just to show it off, right? The second playthrough, I'm going to ask you to look for things to be improved, right? Which brings up what critique is actually for, right? I think that coming to critique as somebody who's getting your work critiqued, it's very easy to see it as either this is my time to show off, or this is my time to try to avoid, like to have people tell me that my work is good, right? And that's not right. If you're putting your work up, if you put your work up there and everybody goes, "Oh, that's awesome, good job," then you actually benefited absolutely none at all from this critique, right? You should be hoping that people catch things that you didn't catch that are messed up, right? Now, the problem with that is you worked a long time on this, right? In a second here, I'm going to ask you to kind of estimate how long you worked on this. But on the majority of the time, like people have worked multiple hours on this, right? And that means you tie a lot of your self-esteem to the work, right? And we've just been doing that all of our life. You drew a pretty picture, you showed it to mom. Mom said, "That's great. You're a great drawer," right? And you're like, "Yeah, I'm good," right? Like that's how that feels, right? And we think that showing off the work is our chance um, to to get that feedback. Um, and so by being artists, we have a tendency to tie our self worth to our work. And when somebody says, "That doesn't look right," we hear it as you're smelly and you look funny, right? And that's not what this should be. Like people will take critique as a personal attack all the time. It's not. This is your chance to get advice on how to improve, right? And one of the things that will help you be a better artist overall is going into critique with that mindset, like finding opportunities to invite more critique, right? Before the project's even due, asking somebody next to you, "What do you think about this car model? Does this look right to you? Like, how could I make that better?" Right? The more you do that, the more you'll improve, the better you'll get, the earlier you'll get hired, right? Um, so what we're going to do today, though, is just kind of a slightly softer version of critique. Is we're going to kind of look at all of them. We're not going to like spend 20 minutes on one of them tearing it apart. But I want you to kind of get in that mindset, because there will be times in your academic career here where people will spend a lot of time telling you all the things that are wrong with your piece individually while you stand there and listen to it, right? Um, Kind of coming into that with the right mindset is the right way to go. So again, I recognize that the vast majority of you probably already know something you want to fix on yours, right? And so you're like, this is useless. I know what's wrong with it, right? And so you'll probably hear those comments, whatever that is, right? Listen for the other comments. Like if you're like, I only got half of mine rendered, right? That's not the only thing wrong with it, Like there may be other things that you could improve with it, right? And so thinking about that as you listen to this critique is important. So let's talk right now really quickly. Why do I have D2L up? Let's talk really quickly about what it is I'm looking for, which we talked about this when we kicked off the project, right? Zoom in on this a little bit. So the purpose of the project is to allow you to explore the basic elements of animation pipelines so you can learn the basics and start to get an idea of what part of the process you enjoy the most. Using the 3 animated vehicles in the bridge from the first 2 exercises, create a full scene adding additional models, lights, materials, textures, animated characters, and other animated elements to make a complete animated shot. Make the scene your own. Some things to consider doing: adding environments, adding additional vehicles, adjusting the materials, lighting the scene, adding camera and motions or cuts, making sure your bridge is going to and from somewhere, not just, what is it crossing? It's not just floating in an empty space. And eliminate any telltale signs that this is not a full 3D world that the viewer is watching, right? You are hoping to immerse the viewer into some world you created here, right? The way that I'm going to grade this is down here, right? We already kind of looked at this rubric: modeling, materials, lighting, rendering, animation, and overall presentation, okay? If you're looking at that and you're seeing, yeah, I did some models, they're all really good. I did some materials, they're all really good. I didn't put any lights in there and I'm turning in a play blast. I did some animation and it's okay. The overall thing is finished, you can watch it, right? That means modeling materials, you may get a good grade on there, but there's no lights. Like, if there's no lights, then that's a 0. If it's not rendered, that's a 0 on that one, or that's at least the lowest gradable point on that. So the reason I say to turn something in now is because if you turn in nothing, I don't even go to this rubric. I just write 0 in there and I make a note that says, this was not turned in on time, it is not revisable, okay? If you turn it in, even if all the points you get are on this last row here, right? All the points you get are the lowest points you can get. Every one of those categories are something you can improve, right? Your animation is sloppy and you only get a 2 on it. You can go back and set more keyframes and turn this back in, right? That is the way this should work, is that if you are willing to continue to push this, like, there should be no reason that I wouldn't update your grade over and over again. Okay. So just wanted to look at that one more time, and this is how you should in the future refer to what you should be focusing on in the project, right? Okay. So that should be enough time. Everybody should be up there. What I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and copy this bridge scene down to my desktop. Made some funny noise. That's cool. And I'm going to open up S-Player, which is a open source media player. I always download this one for critiques, not because it's the best media player. It's because it's the only one I can find that will play videos back to back without a weird hitch in between the videos. So what we're going to look for this first time through, like, don't worry about it. Just watch them and have fun, right? Everybody had the same assignment. Everybody, went out with, so many hours to work on this, and they came back with something. Today, we're just going to get to see what that is, right? What did you come back with? What is happening here? Is that still downloading? I think it's done. And just because it probably won't play, what's happening? Why is it dinging so much? I don't think that one's going to play in here, so I'll go ahead and that's got 2 videos in it. Both of those will probably play. So that's what we're going to do first time through. Before we do that, all these files in here, right? Look at all of those. 19, 20, including the my file. Yes.
Can you delete the shot final? Because mine's going to play twice if you don't.
This one right
Yeah.
here? Yep. 18. So there's 18 items. I didn't do an exact count of the people in class, but that's cool. We have a lot of files in here. This is a lot of work. So first and foremost, I want you to give yourself a hand just for having something done right now. So give yourself a hand. Yay! You have now completed your first Maya project. You've made your first animation, right? This is what that feels like. It will always feel incomplete, right? That is some sort of the thing that people don't tell you at the beginning, is that you never are finished, you just run out of time, right? Because if you had 30 years to work on this bridge scene, you could revise it for 30 years and make it better every time, right? But eventually you're like, no, that project has to be finished because I only have so many years to be alive and I need to make as many pieces of art as I can, right? So this one, it's out of time for this deadline, but again, revisable. So let me just ask you that. A couple of questions, and I want completely honesty here, because it's fine if the answer is no to this one. How many of you enjoyed this? How many of you enjoyed working in Maya on this project? Okay.
Except when it crashed.
Except when it crashed.
Then
I guess
I wanted to just give up.
so that's a good question. How many of you are frustrated with Maya? So, this is Marty. So, while you're here, here's a question, good question. How many of you got the Arnold watermark while rendering in the labs? Okay, so I think it is popping up for some reason. Was it just in this room?
No.
Which other rooms did that happen in?
Downstairs. Like
Downstairs.
and then the room to the right.
So were you using batch render or render sequence?
Batch render.
Did render sequence fix it?
I have something to say though.
Okay.
For mine, the render like watermark didn't come up right away. It popped up after I started rendering a certain amount of frames. So when I originally had 120 frames, the watermark didn't show up, but when I went past that, it started showing up. So I don't know if there's like a limit to how many frames you can do before the watermark comes up, but
I'm rendering now. It seems fine.
For
I can't really tell.
Okay.
I believe everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. I just thought I'd ask why you were here because I thought that might be
Well, that's
one
why
of
it
the
came up.
Yeah.
Greg.
Yes.
For me, while I was in here on Saturday, I rendered on the computers on these two rows on this side, and it didn't put the watermark in. I had to re-render one of my shots yesterday, and I put the watermark in on the same computers. So it didn't do it on Saturday, but it was doing it yesterday.
So what I might do is, after we're done here, I may get one of you all to log in, because it may also have something to do with a student login or something. I may get one of you all to log in and start rendering some shots.
Was it all yesterday?
I had it yesterday. Mine started yesterday too.
Mine did it yesterday.
Mine was on Friday and Saturday. So
Oh, so close.
So
What
close.
was yours? Was yours here or was it at home?
this was here.
Oh.
Huh.
I was going to say maybe it just took Sunday off.
So the rest of you rendered and you didn't get it, and it was all right.
So I wonder if it has something to do with a certain images, like on the machines here.
I could see one or maybe two, but like not
Not half.
one day and then something different the next day.
And it was on 5 computers.
Yeah. It sounds like maybe it was a license glitch on
That's what I wondered.
Sunday, except for that. But I'll
Was there any power outages? Because if there was a power outage, maybe the license server was down or something.
Yeah, that's true. I'm rendering now, at least on the few machines that I can test. It seems okay to me. I'd be curious if someone queued up a render.
Yeah. We may try that after class if somebody wouldn't mind. A couple people wouldn't mind to volunteer to like do another test render, see if it's fixed for you now. Hopefully it is.
Just one frame.
Yeah. Just
Anyways, but thanks for letting us know that, because sometimes like the server goes down or the license stops, and like I don't know unless someone says something. So I appreciate that.
Thank you. And know that it's not going to affect your grade. Like I know lighting and rendering is one of the things in here. That's not something that's within your control. I will say, like you may want to re-render it for future. Like I know nobody likes having Arnold written across their shot today, and like that's a little frustrating after you work that hard for it. It's not going to impact the grade, but I understand that can be annoying. So, so that was, I asked earlier how many of you enjoyed this project. Now, complete honesty, how many of you did not? And this is not me asking, like it's okay if you didn't. This is the information you should be actively seeking from this class, right? Do I like this? Because if the answer is no, even if you think you were going to love animation, we get this a lot in the different concentrations. People come in and they're like, I love animation, Steven Universe. Like I'm wearing like 5 t-shirts right now, all at the same time. They'll all have Steven Universe on it. I love animation, right? And then they start in the class and they're like, this isn't any fun. But I love animation, so I gotta keep doing it. I love it. This isn't any fun, right? Like you do not want to spend your life doing some job that you don't enjoy. Like you are in a privileged position right now that the fact you're at college means you have more options than a lot of people in the world do, right? Take advantage of those options and try to do something you enjoy. Not because like you're going to be happier that way. It's because that's probably going to be the only thing you'll be successful at, right? If anybody's ever had to work a job they hate, anybody ever had to work a job you hate? Yeah. Imagine working that one until you're 60 and you retire, right? That's not something you want to do. That's a like soul-sucking experience, right? You don't want that. If you get to do something that you like are excited about, that you can go into work every day and say, ooh, I'm excited about working on this project, then you're going to be excellent at that, right? Because you're going to put a lot of effort into that. And effort is the only thing that actually makes you better at anything. So I think I've seen people in this major before who stick with animation just because they think that because they've said for several years now they want to be an animator, and they're in denial that they don't actually like creating animation, right? Find what you do like. Like sometimes the people who want to do animation or say they want to do animation actually like creating characters, or they like telling stories, right? And we have majors for both of those. We have concentrations for both of those, right? So that's what you should be looking for right now. If you didn't enjoy this, I would say don't give up on it just yet, because you still have the rest of the class to go, right? And you may change your mind. It may just be you didn't like the parts of animation we looked at today, right? You may get into character animation later on in the last project and be like, ooh, I really like that. That was fun. I didn't like any of that modeling part. I didn't like any of that lighting and rendering part, but I liked moving a character around, right? Or you may find out you like effects, right? That's what this is for. And so I'm going to ask you pretty periodically, did you enjoy that? Because you should be asking yourself that. Yes?
Within the time you did that whole speech right there, I uploaded 3 different things into the file.
Okay.
Right.
I think you're saying I'm talking too much. No, I'm just, I was just being-
Don't pay attention to the names. I got excited and then it messed up. Then I got excited.
Okay.
It's the one that says I rendered for real this time in all caps.
That one?
Yeah.
Okay. Is there any of them to replace in here? Or is that just gonna? Okay.
That one's fine.
Okay.
Oh wait, no, you can just complete the movie.
That one. Okay. Anybody else have anything they need me to toss in there? Okay. Was that it? Or you just okay. Last question before we start watching these. I know you're itching to watch them. You can see them there. Look, you can see a checkerboard or something happening in there, and there's something reflective up there. It's exciting. We're gonna watch them. Last question here. How many of you think, including the hours you worked on this in class, how many of you think you worked 5 hours or more on this? Okay. How many of you think you worked 10 hours or more? 15? You know, it's hard to estimate sometimes. 20? Anybody go over 25? Got one over 25. All right. That's cool, right? An average work week is about 40 hours a day, or it should be if you're working for a reasonable company. Sorry, 40 hours a week. I'm sorry. 40 hours a day. That's a good work week. Yeah. That's what I feel like I've been working recently. 40 hours a week, right? It's 8 hours a day with a lunch break or whatever, right? Sometimes you go a little over. Sometimes you get a special week, you get a little under. Animation is not something that goes very fast, right? If in that hour, or if in that 40 hours, you get 10 to 15 seconds of really solid animation done, that's a great week, right? And that's a little discouraging to people coming into animation because some people are like, ooh, I'm going to go into animation. I'm going to make my own feature film next week, right? And you're like, no, you're not. Like, if you're making a feature film, that's probably the only thing you're ever going to do in your whole life is finish that one feature film, right? If you watch a movie, a Pixar movie, each animator probably only has somewhere between 2 to 3 minutes of finished footage in that, right? To give you a good understanding of this, even in games right now, I'm doing some contract game work. I'll have about 2 minutes of finished animation in video games. In video games, you have to work a little faster than you do in film. 2 to 3 minutes, they're taking about 2 months each, right? So for each character, not minute. So like this is a slow process, and so you have to kind of recognize that. 2D animation goes a little faster if you're doing limited animation, but if you're doing frame by frame animation, you're still looking at the same thing. I think Disney averaged probably about 2.5 seconds of animation a day in the old traditional days, right? It's a slow process, and that's something that like you have to think about. If what you're really wanting to do is tell an epic narrative about, wizards and dragons like going off on a journey, you better be prepared to spend multiple years working on that, right? And we'll talk about that a little bit later, but I do want you to recognize the amount of effort you put into it in terms of hours, right? If you just use the work time you had here in class, you probably got done, right? I guarantee you the ones that are really strong, the ones that make you go, oh, that's neat, right? Those are those people who were in here working, 15, 20 hours on this thing, right? The more hours you put into this, the result is going to be on the screen, right? We're going to see it there. So I'm going to stop talking finally, and we're just going to watch some of these. So I'm going to do Control A, grab all of them, just drag them in here, and we're just going to watch them. over, or did we hit a... I think that was the last one, and it just looped around. Awesome. So how do I get my playlist up here? Somebody see the playlist button? Let's go and close it here and I'll here. That's what it's there we go. Okay. So what'd you think? I think the interesting thing here, 19 pieces, so that's cool. So we probably all saw some consistent stuff that we could work on, or maybe we just saw a couple of pieces that had certain things, but it seemed like a lot of you enjoyed the actual setting keyframes part, making things move. How many of you would say that was one of your favorite parts, making things move? Cool, that's animation. That's what we're going to be doing way more in the animation concentration. How many of you enjoyed the creating the models, the cars, the environments, and stuff like that? All right, cool. You get the opportunity to do a little of that in animation, but if you want the most amount of opportunities to do that, you're probably going to get more of them in game design because video games have a lot of models, right? A lot of those projects are team-based projects, and you get a chance to create lots of models in there and put those into your environments and have characters run around them and whatever. How many of you enjoyed the lighting and rendering part? Two people. That's cool. That's fine. Not everybody has to. Lighting and rendering kind of falls under the animation part of this. There are opportunities to do lighting and rendering in game design, and really you could go into any of the concentrations you like. Animation has specifically the lighting and rendering class that is a requirement. How many of you enjoy the other stuff, like the water? Like creating the water and So that's kind of going to go into the effects part of this, which could be visual effects, the concentration, or it could be animation because part of that is effects animation, like particles, explosions, fire. How many of you enjoy telling a story most? Okay. So some of that is going to be animation. Some of that might be visualization. Right? Visualization is all about creating worlds. How many of you enjoy getting to create your own world for this to live in? Right? So some of that's visualization, right? Somebody has an idea, they come to you in post-apocalyptic world where the robots now live in suburbia and whatever, and you have to develop that world, or you have to develop those characters. You have to take an idea and visualize it so other people can see it and understand your idea, right? And so I think one of the things I hope you're getting from this is learning the things you are liking and where you can go with that. So I'd like to watch them again. Some of you probably noticed a few issues. I'll go ahead and pull a couple of them off the table right now so we can just talk about them. The Arnold watermark, for a few of you, that seemed to just pop up halfway through your animation, right? I know Julia was saying that you're rendering and everything was rendering fine, and then suddenly like one of them stopped rendering correctly, and then you get the watermark. How many of you like half of it has a watermark, but you weren't rendering in 2 sections? It was just all one long render, and suddenly it started getting a watermark. Anybody? Okay, well, it may be the second section that is causing that to happen. And maybe there was rendering on a different day, and the license server was down then. But I have a feeling that that's just what's happened. Is it something with the license server? You didn't do anything wrong. I'm sorry, that part of the frame has a watermark. I'm able to see past the watermark and see the animation underneath it and give you an appropriate grade for that. But I completely understand if you want to re-render that. So that was one issue. Like obviously, that if yours has the watermark, you're probably going to want to tinker around with that and maybe get that finished up or fixed up before midpoint review. But and we'll talk about midpoint later. But otherwise, something else that I did notice is a few of you had a play blast in there. How many of you weren't able to get the final render and what you had to turn in was a play blast? So that was a handful of people. You can kind of notice because play blasts are not going to have as good of lighting. If you have really good textures on there, sometimes you can still kind of pull off something that looks pretty good. You'll also usually notice because play blasts, you'll still be able to see the things that shouldn't render, like the little ring around the car, or there'll be like at the very bottom of your animation, you'll see like the name of your camera, like PESP for the perspective camera, right? And so that's all right. You have something turned in. That means that your revisable part of this is probably just going to be, well, not just, but one of the revisable parts is going to be getting a final render in there. So I have a good grade to give on the rendering and overall presentation part of this. Right? So after taking those off the table, did anybody notice anything? So this is where I kind of talk a little less and you talk a little bit more. Did anybody notice anything like consistent, like the multiple people were doing that you were like, oh, that could probably be better?
I noticed that this happened to me too. Nobody could get the water to splash when the car fell in.
Yeah.
I couldn't do it either. I spent hours trying to figure that out.
So there is a way to kind of do it. There's at least a way to get your water to ripple when something falls into it. Splashing can be a little more complicated. Probably what I would have recommended is faking it, like making some objects that look like splashes, and once the car falls into it, animate those sort of popping up and falling. Getting the ripple is part of the boss water as well, and I can work with you to help you get that. The only problem with it is the settings can be kind of touchy, and if your car slams down into it really hard, that ripple may go crazy and be like, and like suddenly it's tidal waves and stuff like that. So you have to kind of finagle with it until you get the exact right settings on it. So yeah. So that is something we could do to like kind of help it if that's the part is something that happens in your setting.
One of the things I noticed on a few of them that some of the actual motion is a little jumpy.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's moving along, like one of the cars is moving along at a steady pace, and then when it falls off the bridge, it suddenly speeds up twice as fast.
Yeah. So we're going to learn to control that a little bit as we go, but so let's say you needed to adjust that. Let's say you needed to slow that animation down when it falls off of the bridge. How would you do that?
More keyframes, maybe?
So more keyframes.
Add more frames.
Reduce the distance between the frames where the two actions are happening, so it doesn't go as fast between the two.
So reduce or increase?
I mean, increase.
Increase, yeah. So yeah, you could have more keyframes that you could refine your path more that way. It's the number of frames between keyframes though will slow something down. So if you want something to happen really fast, you can make it happen over 3 or 4 frames, right? If you want something to happen kind of slower, it should take like 10 or 15 or 20 frames for that to happen, or maybe even 100, right? Depending on how slow you want it to go. And so really just grabbing that keyframe and stretching it out and making it happen a little later will probably do a lot of that work. And then I think on top of that, you'd have to add some more keyframes to refine the path. Because sometimes you may see something like, the car is going to go off the bridge, it's traveling really fast, and it gets to the edge of the bridge and it goes straight down, right? Like, instead of sort of arcing out and like crashing into the water. And so that's where you would add the extra keyframes, is to get that arc. Other things you saw in the animation, the lighting and rendering, anything that just kind of struck you as you were watching it the first time through?
I noticed a lot of people had either like their grids in or something else that kind of popped up, like the cameras.
Mhm.
Like there was like an outline of a camera moving, or even just like selected objects that still had that kind of grid look on them.
Yeah, more than likely that was the ones that were play blasted. So if you have an object selected when you play blast it, you know how it'll highlight your object when you select it? If you have that selected when you play blast it, you'll still be able to see it highlighted in the play blast. So really the play blast is just making a video of what you see in your viewport. Now there's a way of making a better play blast where you can hide stuff like the little ring or the camera or whatever. And we can just turn off some of those options inside of Maya, but for the most part, yeah, that is one of the things that that you'll see in the play blasts, that like there are extra items in there that you're like, that's not real, or that's not something I would see in a real scene, right? As a giant floating camera above a bridge, right? So like being able to hide those or whatever increases that. I will say the play blast is really just a game engine, and you've seen some good-looking video games that came out of a game engine, right? We can make the play blast look really good, or it's called hardware render is what it is. We can make that look pretty good. It's actually a little more complicated to learn how to do that, but that's something we can learn as you go along. If you like the hardware renderer and you want to learn how to use that, I can show you some stuff in it that really helps. But okay, other things that people saw? Yeah.
There were some objects that were going through other objects, and sometimes the vehicles will start floating like maybe they started off like that, but then like they started floating
Mm-hmm.
as they went along.
Yeah. So we call it, well, like you'll see that sometimes, and you may not see it while you're animating it, right? I remember one example I saw in there was a car that was kind of falling off the bridge, but then it kind of goes through the post, right? And it feels like it doesn't hit the post, or it doesn't like steer around it. And so Maya will let you do that. Like, it's perfectly fine because it doesn't care, right? But viewers will look at that and be like, wait, those two things are occupying the same space, and that doesn't work because my fingers don't go through each other, right? So objects can't go through each other. The other thing is, sometimes you don't see this until the very end, that you'll be like, my car's floating like 3 inches off the ground. And it's like, those are things that like, that's one of the reasons to try to render as early as you can, is because sometimes you don't even notice those until after the render, right? So let's watch them through one more time. We'll probably watch them through a couple more times, but this time I want you to watch them with a more critical eye. Right? Watch them looking for things that can be improved, okay? We can kind of call them out individually if you want to, or you can just, like if you're like, oh, that one where it's got a green background and something, like you can do that, right? Or if you need me to go back, we can look at one individually, because that's not necessarily like honing in on a specific person, and it's okay to do that anyway. It's something that everybody in the class will learn from, because we're going to see multiple examples. Yeah.
Can you point stuff out on your own?
Yeah, absolutely. Like if you already see something on yours and you're like, I know I need to fix that, particularly if you don't know how to fix that, right? I think there's a couple of them we'll talk about as we go here. Kind of watch for this. You'll see like, it looks like it's sparkling, like it's got like little flickers of white dots all over it. And we can talk about like why some of that's happening. So, all right, let's watch through them all the way again. Let's see what we get.
It's the license.
It's the license.
Yeah, we'll have it up probably today or tomorrow.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. curious that last one with the emojis. Who was that? How did you do that?
So I basically I went ahead, rendered my image sequence, took it into Premiere, made a video, and then I brought it to After Effects. Basically, I just did camera tracking, or at least the bottom one. The other two, I just used keyframes and did it that way because the camera tracking wasn't happy when it was going across the area.
That's cool though. So you got some camera tracking to work, and I think that's neat. Like surprisingly, that's hard. Well, it's not hard to do, but that's an extra step that you took just to get that little effect. Is visual effects like something you're enjoying? Like,
I mean, like, I guess really the main reason why I did that is that I really just wanted to compensate for the fact that I didn't do as much as say the other people.
what?
So
I get you, but that was interesting though. Like it's I think that there's something to be said for if you're pulling stuff in from other concentrations or other principles classes that you really liked. Like that's cool. Like if you're like, hey, I learned some really neat things in After Effects, or I learned some really neat things in whatever. An example of that is like if you were worried about the environment, you probably could have like tried to composite it into a background image, like how you do the. So I mean, like there's ways that you can sort of mesh these classes together. Some of you are going to come in with a little more Photoshop experience from the other principles classes, and maybe you end up using that for texturing. Have a lot of Premiere experience. Maybe you render this whole thing out, and then you're like, this is too blue. The whole thing's too blue, right? Well, you probably know some color correction stuff in Premiere. That's not cheating by any means. Like that is fine to do all of that stuff. So other things you noticed in this, what are some things that kind of caught your eye this time through as things that can be improved?
I know that like as far as this being a critique, like a lot of us don't know how to do a lot of things, but as far as just like being overly critical, like when cars crash or something, they just kind of like hold to a stop instead of like a motion, like they actually cross
Like
each other.
more impact on that.
Impacted each other. The one animation that it was like Mario and everything, which is really cool. The reflection of the water, I don't know how they did that anyway, but if you were to like change the camera angle or something, it wouldn't be like a straight like parallel because there's like another side to the bridge, so it's, I don't know, I guess it kind of like counter. I don't know how to describe it, but like, you know, like if it kind of would probably like go to like the side or something, it wouldn't be like just a flat.
Yeah. So like just changing your camera angle could make that a little more dynamic.
Yeah.
I could see that. So that's something that's a good one. We had a lot of people do a lot of camera work in here, right? Some of it multiple cameras. In case anybody's curious, who's somebody who did multiple cameras? So how did you do that?
So I went into I don't remember what tab it was, but I just added a camera, and then I like for me, I've got one that's mounted on a car and one that's mounted on a helicopter, and I just add keyframes to have the camera and the aim follow. Like I had the camera follow the helicopter, and I added the camera to the control circle for the helicopter.
So it was just you're animating along with objects.
Yeah, and then I set keyframes on the camera aim to mount it on one of the cars. I had some issues with it because mine's a little jumpy. But that was because I kept having to move the aim, but it was never in the same place. But yeah, I just added new cameras, and then when I went into render, I picked the renderable camera.
Yeah. So rendered multiple cameras. So you have more than one set of image sequences. Is that how everybody else did it who did multiple cameras too? No, a couple people raised their hand.
I actually wanted to ask, is there any way to just render a specific frame range, or do you have to render the entire thing every time?
No, you can render a specific range. In your render settings, you can choose which range you're...
Like when you click the little box next to it, because whenever I did that at home, it would just render the entire thing anyways.
It's just under the renderable camera. Because like for me, I picked like camera 1 was the helicopter, and then I did like frames. I think it was 60 to 160.
Yeah, because when I was planning my cameras out, I used the camera sequencer instead. So I have like frames 1 through whatever is this camera. So I didn't really know how to.
So that's cool. But that's a different method and viable, which is that, Maya has a way of letting you cut between different cameras when you're rendering, right? So you could have 3 cameras, and you can say, well, I only want to have 0 to 50 from this camera, and then 51 to here from this camera. It's a little like, to me, it's still, I like to render out separate image sequences and then edit that in Premiere, because then you can make timing changes after you're done rendering if you want to. But that's another method of doing that. So that's a method.
Yeah, I was just gonna say mine was number 9, and the 2 things I want to do on mine is I want to add headlights because mine is really dark and I forgot to add headlights, and I also want to figure out how to make the water work.
So so here's number 9. Can we watch it real quick?
See, it's really dark and you can barely see because I don't have headlights on the cars.
So Julia, did you get your headlights to work on yours?
I think so. Mine's on 7.
7. So let's watch that. So yeah, you can kind of see. I mean, it's a little fainter and a little bit further away. Would you mind explaining how you did that on yours?
The circles for the headlights are I made them more like kind of like a whitish yellowy color for the color. And what was it that we used for
It's the
the glow effect?
emission.
Emission?
So if you turn your emission all the way up, it looks like it's emitting light.
And,
And
when
so
and also when I added extra light to come out of it by applying an area light and shrinking it way down. But I also put it in the what's called the
the nerve circle.
The nerve circle. So it was still following the car.
So she has, for each of her cars, she has 2 small lights that are just floating out in front of it, and then 2 objects that look like they're glowing. And so I think that's a good way of working that. We could have made those circles bright enough to where they were actually casting light too, but then your render maybe would wash out a little bit in that spot, so that gives you a little bit more control of it.
Yeah, and I did add like floodlights on my bridge with area lights. I just totally forgot that I needed headlights.
Oh yeah, so that's a good one. So if it's all right, I want to look at yours one more time because you have something else going on that some other people may have, which is the sparkles all over the place. It's actually weird. If you're watching it on your computer, it's much brighter on the screen. I think some of it's just the brightness in the room here, but some of it is the projector just doesn't. It's not as bright as a screen. You're getting all these little flickeries out here, right? You can kind of see it a little bit here. And I saw it in some others as well. Let me see if I can find. No, not that one.
No, mine had it.
Which one?
Found it. No,
Oh, this one.
it's just pixelated.
Oh yeah. So the pixelation is really just coming from the Play Blast, I think. Yeah, that's a good one to example. Yeah. So you're seeing how we're getting kind of that graininess here, like it's really kind of grainy. So there's a couple of things that can cause that. One of them, though, usually what the culprit is your lights. It's the number of samples coming out of your light. So if you look in your shadows, and your shadows have a little bitty like crawling like grain to it, just turning your samples up, it makes your render a little slower, but it makes that much smoother. And I'm guessing that that's probably where that's coming from. So something else I was going to say about this, and I don't remember what it was. Graininess. No. Oh, no, that wasn't that either. All right. I'll keep going. So other notes that the people saw? Yes.
I had to completely scrap my original bridge because I did it in my dorm, and the version of mine that was not compatible with Arnold, or I couldn't pay for it,
Oh.
more or less. So that's why
If
I
you-
have the spaceship things, because I just had to completely start from scratch yesterday, and I just did what I could.
So if you brought it over here, it still wouldn't work?
That's what I kept trying to, but it's like not in .mb files. All the my files I make there, they're like MIT or MT or something like that, and they just don't work. I'm not sure how
MT sounds like material. There's an MA. .ma and .mb is usually the two MIA files. Yeah, we can look at that.
Oh, MLT is what it is. Bridge. And they just like, whenever I put them on I got a portable hard drive, so I thought maybe doing it from Google Drive was what was making it not come over correctly. But no, it still just would not play on my end.
I wonder if it's saving it in a different spot and what you're grabbing is not the actual Maya file, it's
That
something
could be
else.
it. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Yeah, let's look at that and make sure that, because,
I mean, I hadn't like really done anything yet, so it's just the bridge.
yeah. So other issues you saw that, they could be improved?
One of the things I saw was a lot of like there was almost all of them tried to eliminate the fact that it's not a full 3D environment, but there were just some small little issues like I think. Do you mind if I point out one of yours? For yours, the bridge just kind of stops at the mountain. It doesn't keep going,
Yeah.
and even with your texture, like even before it messes up,
Yeah.
the background behind the mountain doesn't quite fit with what's in it.
Oh, I know. I definitely need to fix the background.
So like you see
Oh, I see
the
that.
background there in the top behind the mountains.
So interesting, did you use did you composite this in Premiere with that background, or did you?
The background, I tried to, like, I found, like, stock photos and stuff I could use, and except the stock photos aren't EXRs like this, so I don't know if that's what messed the background up, because I had to, when I put the background in, it looked not like the picture that I got off of the free stock photos. It was like, wait a minute, it became very pixelated. So I tried to make it green still to match with the background, but it still looks thick.
I get you, but that's cool. That's fine. And that's one of the reasons we do this first one is like you learn from these, right? And I think what you were saying is like it's going across these two land masses, but like on the other side of it, it needs to continue going somewhere.
It does.
Yeah, like,
Yeah.
well, I had a similar issue with mine. Like I added, like I built a city and I added some ramps into it, and you showed me how to do a sky dome. But I had a similar issue with the thing at the top because I've got clouds back there on the sky dome, but they're really big.
Yeah.
Like mine's third. It's about halfway through that you see it. It's just after this. Like right there. It's just a lot of
This is
clouds,
like-
really big
This
right
is
there.
yeah. This is Hurricane Florence coming after us. Yeah, I get you. Like it's sometimes like that scale can be difficult, and using the sky dome helps with lighting, and it gives you some environment. But yeah, sometimes there's a lot of back and forth with
I've
that.
got some of that graininess you were talking about too. On
Yeah.
the sides of buildings.
Yeah, you can kind of see it on the helicopter there too. You see how it's got a little bit of like graininess to it. So there's a couple of places where we could tweak with that, but more than likely that's going to be coming out of the light. There's a couple of other places though that we can find that too. So, other issues you were seeing?
Someone already mentioned the fact that whenever something ceases motion, oftentimes it will just stop
Yeah.
abruptly. On the opposite side of that, I've noticed a lot of times whenever it switches to something as simple as driving, it just goes from this to just freaks out and just absolutely loses all sense of reality and time and space and everything.
Yeah. Well, I think that some of that is we're so used to seeing the actual results of how physics works, right? And that we realize that, I mean, it's one of the reasons you have to take physics. I know it's not always fun, but energy doesn't just come from nowhere and it doesn't just go away, right? Like it can't be created or destroyed. It just has to transfer from object to object or from, whatever, element to element. And sometimes it would feel like there was a certain sudden surge of energy as if something hit the car, but we didn't see anything hit the car, right? Or the car suddenly stopped, but we didn't see the car hit anything, right? And that is really hard to control just by hitting S. I'm going to show you some more techniques later on, but that's a lot of what we learn how to control in the animation concentrations. Because Maya will do its best to make something move, right? It will move it just fine. Making it move in a very specific way, though, is actually pretty challenging. And So that's where we're going to kind of get most of our practice in the animation concentration. So, okay, other comments on these? You want to watch them through again? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, I think you had your hand up earlier, too. So let's go with you first, and then we'll talk to you.
This is just a quick thing because this is specifically for this one. It's an awesome animation. Like, I think all of them are awesome. It's still just like nitpicking, but in one of the like previous frames, like there's a car that goes off the bridge and like part of the bridge comes off of it, which is really cool. That's a cool effect.
Is that the
bridge
bit there?
actually broke, but it was before this, I think. But like on the opposite side of like where the car actually like broke the sea, the other side like broke off the bridge, but nothing actually ran into it. So it was like the thing where it's like what is it?
Well, if you keep playing it, pause it.
Oh.
So you saw like there when they were coming off the bridge. You're talking about the one coming off on the right.
Oh, did it do it at a different time and I just didn't see it?
Yeah, there are two cars hit two sides of the bridge. So that truck hits the bridge there and it pops off.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So the one thing I always learn from this class is that I'm not riding with any of y'all. No. So you had some other comments up here? What you saying?
Oh, okay. So I was just like for the water on mine. So like whenever I was doing it on the computer, like you could actually tell it was water. But when after it was rendered, you can tell that there's something there, but it doesn't. The blue tint kind of like disappeared.
Is it just rendering like black?
Oh, well, mine's the 11. Like it's just rendering the same color. I feel like it's like way too clear. Like you can't tell it's water.
Oh.
Yeah, I did remember those ones.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know it was water.
How did you do it?
Well, I did with the
Did you do the glass thing?
yeah, preset for glass. I
You-
gave it 10%.
It may be, so there's something called transmission, and probably if you're doing glass, that transmission is all the way up. And that's kind of like transparency. So we may just need to pull that back down a little bit. That's interesting too, because I didn't realize that, but like some of the motion on this is really good. So yeah, let's work with that. I'll see if I can help get that material working. Okay. Oh, you had one too.
Do planes not render? It's kind of a critique and question because in my scene, the eyes look really creepy, of course, and I don't have the detail to my background because all those were planes and they aren't there.
It may depend on the material that was on the plane. They should render if it's just a polygon plane. What was? You remember what the materials were?
I didn't say the material. I just made a plane made of red or blue.
Yeah, let's look at that. And usually, when something doesn't render in Maya, it's because it has a material that Arnold doesn't recognize. So some of you may be fishing around through the materials, recognize that there's a water material in there. And that one works if you're rendering in Maya software, but if you're rendering in Arnold, it just renders as if it's not there because it can't recognize the material. So that's my guess, is it's something to do with that. Or that like the same thing with his, like the transmission all the way up. So yeah, let's check those out here in the next OBOS. Yeah.
Okay, I was going. So I also had trees on mine and it didn't render. Like, cause you know the brush effects, do they render?
I remember seeing that. Yeah, that should have rendered.
Like they're on my original one. Like if I pull it up, they'll like be there, but
When you hit render, it just doesn't show up.
Okay.
So that might be similar thing. We can convert Paint Effects trees into mesh, and then it should render. So let me work with you on that one too. We should be able to get that going. So.
Says, I have no idea what exactly happened on mine where the texture of the mounts just disappears.
Mhm.
I mean,
Now, were you rendering on two different machines?
I actually was like rendering on like 3 different ones. Well, I started Friday rendering on one,
Mhm.
but it took so long. It was like, okay, I gotta finish this
Gotta get
the
it.
next day. So and then on Saturday, I rendered on these 3 machines right here.
So what may have happened is on one of those machines, for some reason the texture, it wasn't finding the texture. And it could be that the project wasn't set correctly on that one, or when you applied the material, or when you applied that texture, the project wasn't set correctly, and the other two just found it anyway, but that one didn't. So we should be able to just re-render that section of frames if you still have that. You can find that number, just pull those out and re-render those and make sure that the texture is connected up, and that should fix it. So that would be my only guess. Usually when the texture disappears, it means like maybe when you plug your hard drive in on this machine, it recognizes it as the F drive, but when you plug it in over here on this machine, it recognizes it as the G drive, and it's still looking for the texture on the F drive, right? So it's usually something like that. So y'all want to watch it one more time? Like look for some other stuff again. It's cool. Let's watch it one more time. Get one more batch of feedback. The thing I would say is we're commenting on specific ones, but when you listen to those comments, think if that applies to yours, right? Is that something you could improve on yours as well, right? It's doing that thing. For some reason, this player freezes up. So let's go ahead and kill that. Reload it. I wish that real roads just had random ramps on them. Make my commute way more interesting. Anything y'all noticed that time, sir? Sorry.
I don't really want to do a call out on this, but there's one thing I noticed. It was the one that was like the toy scene.
Mhm.
You know? It looked like the only thing that went awry there was they placed one keyframe and didn't delete it, so it shot
So
back and then
it went forward and then back and
just
then
like
forward again.
one keyframe that was there.
And that's easy to like sometimes accidentally do too. Like you
Yeah.
like you're moving something else and like you accidentally copy. Yeah.
Can I say what I was trying to do and why I did that? Because I know that's
Yeah, that's cool.
with it. So that was one of the things, like, because it was supposed to be a toy, I wanted to try and have it as if like it was just going back and forth, like someone was playing with it. And it took me a while to actually get it to actually like go back like that, but then I couldn't figure out how to just make it keep doing that, so it just kind of shot back and I just kind of left it. So that's something that I know I just need to work on as far as figuring out how to actually make it do that. If that makes sense.
No, that's cool. Yeah. So like it would just kind of be like you think of those different locations you want it to be, and you just set extra keyframes for those. But we're going to practice the keyframe thing here in a few exercises. And so, yeah, I have a feeling like in a couple of weeks, you'll look back at this one and be like, "Oh, I could do so much more with those cars now." Having said that, there were more people tried, I don't want to say experimental, but tried like difficult things with your cars and did a lot of interesting things with cameras in this. Like, there was one, it's not finished rendering, but nope, it's the one right before this thing. Nope, one more. Yeah, this one right here. Like, the render still needs some work, but I really like the camera work right here. Like, this is really, like, that's just a nice, entertaining shot, right? And I think that there's something to be said for that. I mean, here's another one that has like some strong camera work. So, the way your camera, and this one shows up way darker up here. I would say after we get done here, check out some of the ones on the screen. That way you can see them a little bit in their full, color and brightness and everything. This is something you'll see though pretty often throughout your time here, is that like the projector's not going to be quite as bright, but that's kind of true with everything. Some people's TVs are going to be set to sports instead of theater or whatever when they watch your animation. So you kind of have to account for that and make sure you're hitting a range that everybody can see the brightness in it. Other things that people were seeing. Oh, yours.
Again, still just like nitpicky things. It's the one, like the second to last one, like the police chase, like the car like goes over the ramp and it makes it over the bridge, but the other cars don't. But like it stops before it goes over the ramp and then goes.
Mm-hmm.
When like if it were like an actual thing, like the car would have to speed up in order to make the jump.
Yeah.
Which I know it's like nitpicky.
Like continuing that momentum through it. Yeah, that's one of the things. So interestingly, we learned that how to control that is way more technical than you might think. Because really, what we're looking at there is a graph. It's like how does that car's forward location progress over time, right? We can graph that out, and then we can manipulate that graph. And so we'll look at that a little bit later. Don't sweat it too much just yet. We get it. I think Project 2 is when we kind of look at that. But that is going to give you a little bit more control over that as well.
Yeah, so one of the things I noticed on several was some things just kind of happen for no reason. Like, on the very first one, the thing falls away, and I think the cannon, the tank is supposed to shoot something at it, and then it falls, but nothing actually happens. And then another one, it's two cars driving, and one in the back just kind of falls off the bridge, but there's no reason for it. Like, it's not trying to avoid anything. It's not like coming in at an angle. It's driving straight and it turns and falls off the bridge.
Yeah, like sometimes you need a cause and effect to understand an action. So. Other comments?
Was that last one you were talking about, the one where it was back and it was the one in the very back?
Yeah, and then the tank kind of turns.
Yeah, well, my idea for that was that the tank stops short and makes the car swerve and go off.
Oh, okay.
But I didn't really convey that very well. I probably could have done it better if I did more camera angles, but or something like that.
So
Maybe made it swerve a little more.
So this is cool because this is one of the cool things about showing stuff at Critique is that people watch it, and then the thing that you think you may have been communicating well, once you show it to an audience, they'll be like, "Wait, what just happened there?" And that's how you learn what it is you need to improve. The same way, like, when you were younger, you were learning to write a sentence. You wrote a sentence, you handed it to your teacher, and they said, "I don't understand what you're trying to say," and you had to rewrite that sentence, right? This is just a more complicated sentence. Right? So I think one of the things I'll just kind of chime in here on is there are a lot of very shiny things in a lot of these scenes. The cars should be probably shiny, but sometimes it's like the pavement's a little shiny. And is it supposed to be? Did you want it to be to make it feel like it's iced over? If so, is there a way you can convey that that's like icy? That's not just making it shiny. So that's something to kind of look at in terms of materials. Sometimes by default, all of your materials are going to be shiny turning down the specular. Specular is the channel that's going to control a lot of the glossiness, a lot of the highlights. And so that's something that we can kind of play around with to adjust that. Some stuff should be more or less shiny than others. So, yes.
Okay, and because I know on the rubric it had to be like 10 to 12 seconds long. For that, do we have to like adjust like the frames, or do we like us? Because I know mine went like really fast, but I had 120.
No, that's fine. Actually, I should have looked at that a little bit closer. If you were a little under the 10-second range, what I really should have written was probably about 8 to 12 seconds long. Because I don't know why I left it at 10. I was expecting it to be average at about 10. And when I wrote that, for some reason, I wrote the minimum as 10. So if you're a little short on that, don't sweat that. So just,
When you're looking at that, like for mine, I added like the title and the fade out in Premiere, and that bumped it up to 16.
yeah,
But the actual animation is only like 12 or 13.
yeah. That's,
So we would just be looking at that.
yeah, I'll say that. So the only reason I really even it just needs to be long enough to tell me a story, right? The only reason I really even put anything in there is because the first time I assigned this, I didn't give a frame range, and somebody turned in something that was less than a second, and it was like, what just happened? Like, it was like over before it even started. And it's just to make sure you're using a little bit of time, but also to make sure you're not like, this is where I make my 3-minute epic car chase like scene, and then you try to render that and you can't get it done, right? Other comments? So we're getting close on time here. I think that we're kind of on one here. I do think that one of the things to make sure on is that, like I said, your bridge is going to somewhere or from somewhere, or if you can't see it, at least that you extend it past the edge of the frame, because it doesn't have to go on forever like the actual road does, right? It just has to go on forever within what we can see, right? It's really just whatever pixels end up on your screen here. That's what the audience is going to see. They're not going to see anything behind the camera. You get to choose what you're showing them, and you want to make sure that the things you show them on the screen feel like a real world, right? How many of you have cried while watching a cartoon? Like, you gotta admit it. Not even Dumbo's mom. Come on, yeah. So we all have, and we all know that that's not real, right? Like we all it's because you get immersed in that. There's actually some theories that say it's a form of hypnosis, because I can't stop myself. I cry at I cry at everything. I'm crying in the middle of a CSI Miami episode or something. Like it's like no sense. It's not sensical at all. That it's a form of hypnosis. You've hypnotized yourself into believing that these are real things and that you should care about it. And that's one of the powers that you have as an animator, is to try to get people to fall into this world, right? You want them to forget they're watching an animation and start just paying attention to the thing you made, like paying attention to the story or the actions that you're showing. So I think it's important to point out, let's say we have 19 of them here. They seem to be averaging between, let's say 6 to 12. So let's say on average we're looking at about 9 seconds each, right? If we were averaging all this out. So let's go ahead and pull up our calculator here, because I suck at math. Let's not do that. There it is. So 19 times 9 divided by 60. That means 19 people here, working collectively for about 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks, something like that, was able to make 2.85 minutes of animation. So every time we've watched that, we watch about 3 minutes of animation. So I think that that's important for you to recognize, is that it takes a lot of work to make a lot of animation, right? And you all put a lot of work into this. I can tell, because it's impossible to get a result at all without at least a substantial amount of work, right? Some of you put a ton of work into this and came out with something awesome, right? I want to draw that parallel for you. More work equals better result. Like, more effort, better outcome, right? that of course, like it's not like always a straight line, right? You're sometimes you're going to put tons of work into it, and all sorts of stuff is going to mess up. All of that stuff that's messing up is you learning how to get better at this, right? And so, still in the long run, more work equals better outcome. Okay, more effort. So, I want to thank you for the amount of work you put into your first project, and I want to acknowledge that the first project has a lot of challenges, and this was probably a very stressful deadline for you. Was this stressful? Okay. How many of you had another project due like close to the same time, and all that was adding up? Yeah. College is rough, right? So what I'd like to do, because I always recognize that this first project is full of all of that stuff, and this is where like this is your first time you try to render an entire sequence, I like to give you the option to turn this in one more time before I look at it, if you want to. So some of you like came in this morning like I didn't have time to get the last few frames of this rendered, or oh my render messed up halfway through and my textures disappeared, right? Like, or oh I rendered from the wrong camera, or like whatever. Like I didn't have enough time to go back and fix that animation I wanted to, right? I'm giving you 2 more days. Okay, so if you have something in here, you can revise it anytime you want to. But before I even look at it the first time to grade it, if you want to revise it, I will look at whatever it is you turn in on Wednesday. Okay, so if you want to spend another 2 days tweaking this, making little changes, addressing maybe some of the comments that you heard today, you got a couple of extra days, bought you a little bit of extra render time there, and that's what I'll grade the first time through. After that, so basically when you come back in here Wednesday, if you made a revision, just go ahead and drop it into the same folder, but just put the word revised at the end of it, right? After that, though, you should submit all revisions after Wednesday to that folder. Okay, so there's now a revisions folder in submissions. If you don't get a chance to revise it by Wednesday, but you get a chance to revise it over this next weekend, and you get something by Monday, come in and drop it in the revisions folder. And when I do my grading, I'll check that revisions folder. Usually what I do is I grade whatever I haven't graded yet, and then after I'm done with that, I grade the revisions folder. What I will do once I've graded the items in the revisions folder is I usually make a new folder in here called graded. So you'll just drop it out here in the open space here. But once I've graded it, I'll drop it in the graded section. That way you know I've looked at that and I've updated the grade, right? And if you drop it in there on Monday and I grade it, and then you see your updated grade and you see the new notes and you're like, oh, I can fix that really quick. And you edit it and you update it again the next Monday, I'll update the grade again. And then after I've updated the grade, you make a change to it again, I'll update the grade. I'll do this as many times as I can until this class is over. So the last day to turn in a revision is the last day of class when we meet for the final. Okay, so we'll look at what that date is, but usually everybody chooses the last possible day.
So, is there a point where you will stop revising a certain project? Like, could we turn in a revised version of this the day before the exam?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. What I will say is I don't grade revisions every day. So if you're needing a revised grade or you're needing feedback on something quickly, I would say probably the easiest way to do it is before you even turn in a revision, show it to me and I can give you that feedback. And then, because I don't want you like waiting on me to get a grade. Like let's say I grade on Sunday night and you turn something in Monday and it's another week and a half before I grade again. I don't want you waiting a week and a half if you're just urgent to get feedback on that. But no, you can turn in this first project all the way up to the very last day of class. Having said that, recognize the semester usually doesn't get easier as we go along, right? You're going to have more and more stuff like landing on your plate. English papers due, more projects for this class due. So usually that's why I encourage you to do it pretty early. Like it's fresh in your brain right now. You know how to fix it. You're probably exhausted, so maybe like take a little nap and then get back to work, right? And that's really the process you repeat until you retire. I just now saw an email from somebody asking me for a revision for a contract piece I'm working on. So hopefully this is helpful. I've recorded this lecture. I don't think any of you are showing up on camera if you're camera shy. It's mainly just the screen and a little bit of camera up on the top here. I'm going to go ahead and save this and upload this to YouTube so you get these notes as well if you want to watch them again. I have a feeling this is one that most of you remember the pertinent stuff, but you may be like, oh, what was that called again? And you can go check this video out. What I do want you to do right now, though, is be proud of your work. Right? Whether it's finished or not, whether you are completely satisfied with the result or not, you got results. You're better at this than you were the day you walked into this class, right? And you should be proud of that. That's not just because you're not, making a Pixar quality like film yet. That's not reasonable, right? You got better, and that's all you can hope for. Just keep getting better. So give yourself a round of applause for that. And thank you for the effort. So I will see y'all on Wednesday. I'm going to go ahead and upload this video, and have a great day. Yes.
Do you think you could quickly show me after you upload that how to just